let's uh, let's get started now. What is the need for influencing skills in the industry, in software industry as of now? If you realize, we often land in situations at work where we may not really align with our managers or other team members. And then the cause of this difference in opinion could be anything from values, differences in values, beliefs, differences in personality, style, or different perspectives or priorities. So when we encounter these situations, our behavior sometimes may not be really appropriate that we ideally think we should have, and this is primarily because they are mostly driven by our emotions and sometimes by fear. So it is important that we learn and use a structured approach to deal with these kind of situations, and we use objective criteria to make decisions and influence or convince others. So this influencing skills is even more critical, is equally critical for the role of a business analyst as well. Why? Because a business analyst role, if you look at it in IT, it sits right in between business and the technology teams. So in a way, BAs are uniquely positioned to understand the needs or requirements of both sides. So this enables BAs with their functional and technical skill sets to go beyond their role that is required of them and help arrive at sometimes at the right solution when there are differences in opinions between business and IT or among IT engineering teams. So if a BA has strong negotiation skills backing him or up, the BAs can get the teams to do the right thing. If they know the right thing, they can get the teams to do the right thing, and then thereby they create a platform for themselves to become great future leaders in the future, with a good mix of functional as well as behavioral or soft skills. So with this introduction, let me give the agenda for today's webinar. So the first thing is to understand some of the concepts before we even get into negotiation. What is conflict? What is dispute? Let's try to understand the differences between them. Then we will try to understand the different techniques that are available to solve for conflicts and disputes. And then we will look in detail on using negotiation. What does it mean? And let's put a structure around how to use negotiation in different scenarios. Finally, we will look at a set of multiple tools that are available for people when involved in negotiations with different parties. So because I might be talking a lot, please type in your questions as they come, and I will try and answer them in between, or I'll keep them. I'll kind of leave them. I'll kind of reserve answering all these questions towards the end. Okay. So now let's spend a couple of minutes trying to understand the difference between conflict and dispute. What does it actually mean between the two? I mean, if you look at it superficially, conflict and dispute kind of mean at a high level. They kind of show, or they kind of mean that there is a disagreement between two parties, and in most of the situations they are kind of used interchangeably in different scenarios. So let's first try to kind of get clear understanding on, or a clear definition of how we would use conflict and dispute in this webinar and for negotiation in general going forward. So what you see on the slide is kind of definitions. Dictionary definitions on what is a conflict, what is a dispute. Conflicts and disputes both can be used as a verb, and they can also be used as a noun. But more importantly, if you see beyond the superficial definitions of conflict and dispute, conflict usually arises when the parties have disagreements because of differing needs or values. So I believe this is what I need to do, and the other side believes there is something else that they need to do. Then it's probably we'll define that as a conflict. Dispute is where there is alignment on the needs or on values, but actually there is differences in positions on how we would achieve those needs or how we would address those needs. So then it is called a dispute. Let's try to understand this with some examples. A simple example is what you see here. In conflict, the scenario is specified. So there is an IT architect in a team who wants to upgrade a technology in 6 months. And then you have a project manager who wants 5 new features to be delivered in the next 6 months. And then there's a project or program manager who wants the team to support him or her in scaling the team through training, interviews, and a few other tasks. So now you have three parties. Each party has different needs. So what should the team focus on next or immediately? So this is a case of a conflict. Let's look at dispute. A product manager asks for a time that it takes to implement a specific change request. The project manager or the team states it would take 2 months. The product manager says, well, 2 months is a lot of time to deliver the simple change. It should not take more than a month according to me. So in this case, the product manager on one side, the team or the project manager on the other side, they've kind of aligned that this request needs to be completed, but they have a different position. One person says it's 2 months, the other person doesn't really specify how much time is required, but kind of specifies that this is not the time I was expecting you to give me as an answer. So this is a case of a dispute. There is alignment in terms of what needs to be addressed, but there is differences in opinion or positions in terms of how long we should take to address this. A quick example, we'll probably look at some more examples as we go further beyond, but the objective here is to kind of set the platform straight that when we try to get into negotiations, there are two different needs. One is a conflict as a need, another one could be dispute as a need, and there is a very basic difference between these two, even if superficially they kind of look the same and they are used interchangeably at many times. Let's try to quickly understand what is conflict versus what is dispute resolution. So both are at a high level. The resolution is a process of arriving at a solution to the disagreement. On one side, it could be the disagreement because of a conflict. The other side, it could be the disagreement because of differences in positions or opinions. And there are multiple techniques that exist for each. Of course, negotiation is a common technique that could be used for both. For conflict, you have techniques like bringing in outsiders, where you tend to bring in a third party who is neutral, who can provide a fresh or a different perspective. Sometimes you could use an authoritative command, kind of a leader who says, well, I understand what your disagreement is, but here is what I'm telling you. Both of you follow the same, or you all follow the same. Restructuring is change the structuring of the team so that if the structure was the reason which is creating the conflict, it can be addressed. Superordinate goals is a means wherein the objectives of the different parties or the goals of the different parties are defined in a way that it eliminates the need for a conflict. Expansion of resources, if the conflict was primarily because of resources or people, whatever it be, then expand to remove the conflict. Dispute resolutions, again, negotiation is a means. Mediation is kind of using a neutral or a third party to resolve the dispute between two people. Just that in mediation, the two parties may or may not decide to adhere to what the outcome of the mediator says. It's not legally bound. Whereas arbitration, litigation are two legal techniques to resolve disputes, and they are more legally bound and they are done in a legal setting. And for today, our focus is going to be primarily on how to use negotiation and why negotiation is a better way to resolve conflicts. Sometimes, right, even if you are unclear whether the situation is arise because of a conflict or a dispute, or is it so complex that it has a mix of both, negotiation is easier because it's a common technique. You can arrive at a common solution using this technique without even really differentiating between whether it's a conflict or a dispute. And it's a direct resolution. It involves the parties who are impacted and their representatives to mutually discuss and resolve the problem. There are greater chances of mutual benefits and lesser chances of impairing an existing relationship because the parties sit together and talk. It is less expensive when compared to activities like like mediation, arbitration, where you will have to bring in third parties and you will have to pay for them. And negotiation is extremely voluntary in nature. You don't have, it's not legally bound. What is negotiation? It's a method of settlement between two or more parties through discussion intended to arrive at a beneficial outcome for both the parties. So this is probably the best definition. It was derived by a person called, it is derived from, there's a famous book on negotiation. It's called Getting to US by Roger Fisher and William Ury. And this is one of the best definitions, and this is one of the best selling books as well. And this definition is put forth in that book. Now let's get into, well, we understand negotiation is good. It can be applied for conflicts. It can be applied for disputes, and we know what are the, at a high level, what is the difference between these two. Now let's try to understand how can you structure the process of negotiation. It could be for, maybe for dispute or conflict, for any of these situations. So we came up with a specific process or a structure. We called it as SPego structure to resolve a conflict or a dispute using negotiation as a process. And this process is cyclical in nature. It can repeat itself any number of times, again and again, whenever there is an issue. So whenever, I mean, if you look at it, there are stakeholders in a project or in any kind of a setting where some kind of execution is kind of going on, or some kind of decision making needs to happen. And these stakeholders are motivated by the set of objectives that they need to achieve. And in the process of defining or executing to achieve these objectives, there can be situations where there is a conflict or there is a differences of opinion. Instead of a dispute, I'm just going to call it as differences in opinion. And when that happens, the stakeholders can go through this cyclical process of strategize, prepare, execute, and evaluate. So that is SPego framework for us. It is very cyclical in nature. So you strategize the process situation, you prepare for negotiation, you execute for negotiation, finally evaluate the benefits. It comes back to the stakeholders again. They will go back to where they stand in terms of achieving their objectives, what is the next conflict or what is the next dispute that is stopping them, which is the blocker, and then they can keep applying this again and again in order to meet their objectives. We will look at each of these steps in detail from now on. So first thing we're going to talk about or see about is the strategize phase. There are two parts to this strategize phase. The first one is you define or understand the situation. And then the second part of this phase is to actually make a call if negotiation should be used or should you go for alternative resolution techniques. If it's conflict, look for those techniques. If it's negotiation or if it's a dispute, go for those corresponding techniques. First step is identifying the issue, or the first step is kind of assessing the situation in strategize. In this, there are 4 primary steps, activities. The first activity is you identify the issue and the type of issue. Issue could be a conflict or a dispute, and it could also be looked on as a backward or a forward-looking issue. So we'll look at this in the forthcoming slides. But try to understand that the issue could be a conflict or a dispute and how you are looking at the issue. Are you looking at it backward or are you looking at it forward? The next step is you determine the parties who are involved and what are their positions, so that you understand why is there this specific difference in opinion or disagreement happening. Separate people from problem, which is very important, and then you complete your situation analysis and say, this is my problem, these are the parties involved, this is the issue, this is backward or forward, and then these are the this is each one's position at this time. So that's defining the situation. Let's look at conflict or issue type, conflict or dispute, and in a much detailed way as well. So we saw at a high level what is a conflict versus what is a dispute. Now let's try to understand that conflict and dispute can also happen in 3 different areas. One is in terms of conflict or dispute can happen in terms of the objectives, it can happen in terms of the approach, or it can happen in terms of personalities. So what is the difference in terms of objective? So by objective, I mean the parties who are involved do not agree with what needs to be achieved. Okay. For example, the example that we saw before is the case of a conflict in terms of objectives. So we saw there are three parties involved from a conflict standpoint. Architect had a new technology upgrading their map. Product manager had features. Project manager had scaling. Team member was not sure. What are we going to focus? How are we going to satisfy all these needs? The dispute was there is alignment, but there was differences in opinion in terms of how much time it takes. So objective is do not agree with what needs to be achieved in terms of time or in terms of goals. Approach is, well, we agree with what needs to be achieved, but we do not agree with the steps that needs to be taken for an activity to be completed. An example is architect says we should build a custom solution. The business says we should buy a product and deploy it, like COTS of the shelf solution, commercial off the shelf product. Now the consultant, which side? So how should he go ahead, or the delivery team, how should they go ahead with the implementation? This is a case of conflict. They have two different approaches. An example dispute for approach will be one stakeholder says we should go with this vendor to develop a solution. The other person says, well, I have reservations with regards to using this vendor. So can we look at options? So there are different positions. So, but the agreement is, they have to go ahead with a vendor to go ahead and implement it. Which vendor is the reason? Then it is an example of a dispute. Personality conflicts. Basically, the style. There are disagreements with regards to the style. One example is there are two members in a team. One of them very passionate about doing the work, and the other one, the other one kind of looks to be as an opportunist and always seeking visibility more than passionate about doing what work it is about. Goes on, what others think about this person. So that's a case of a conflict. The other is two members in a team. One of them is very slow and perfectionist. The other one is very fast and iterative. They just have two different styles, but they are both focused on. They're both passionate about doing the same set of work. It's just the style that they adopt, which is totally two extremes of the way they do their work. So I just wanted to kind of give some ideas or some exposures in terms of, when you have an issue, look at it whether it's a conflict or a dispute, and then try to understand where exactly is this conflict happening, whether it's happening in terms of objective, approach, or personality. That kind of gives a clear view of the situation. What is the situation, so that we kind of get away from people completely. Well, I see a message. I'm going to go back to the questions. So someone says, seems like there is an issue with the dial-in. I have dialed in via mobile. However, from landline, it keeps asking to enter access code and doesn't accept. I don't really know how do we solve this problem of dialing in from the landline. Let me quickly check if there are other alternatives, if there are any other ways to dial in to this request. I think as part of the email that you had received, there were international dial-in messages. So can you quickly check if there is another means? Okay, I think this one, Surendra said he will handle this in parallel. So I'll go ahead with this discussion for now. So we stopped at conflict versus dispute. What's the problem? Now we are going to head towards forward versus backward looking in terms of issue types. So what is forward looking or backward looking? An issue is said to be backward looking when the event involving the two parties has already happened and the outcome was not as expected, and the parties are trying to examine what went wrong and on the extent of damage, how much each one should owe. An example is a contractual performance between a customer and a vendor, and things that have been missed because of mistakes from both the sides probably. The question is, there's some damage that has happened. How do we? So who is going to take the responsibility for this damage? How are they going to solve this? So that is backward looking. The other thing is, quality issues of a completed project. And there are multiple parties who are involved, and the question is going to be, well, who's going to take responsibility for the issue that has happened? So that's an example of backward-looking issue. Forward-looking issue, on the other hand, is where the forward-looking is the parties are in disagreement in an action to be taken now. That is forward to the future. For example, there is an issue that has happened, there is a schedule that has been slipped, there is a milestone that has been missed. Instead of looking at who is responsible for missing the milestone, the focus is more on, we understand we have missed this milestone, what can we learn from our mistakes and change the responsibilities or roles so that we kind of adhere to the milestones overall globally going forward. That is forward looking. So backward looking is more adversarial, forward looking is more problem solving. And there is a different from a negotiation standpoint, they also literature standpoint, backward lookings are usually called as position based negotiations. What is position based? Well, the two sides take a position and then they argue for that position from their side. In interest based, which is more forward looking, both though they start off with some kind of a position, but the objective is to try to understand mutual interests and let's gain from the differences in the disagreement at this time. So an example is position based haggling between customer and a shopkeeper. So shopkeeper says a value, like this is the value of this product, customer has a different value, so each one takes a position, $100 on one side, $200 on the other side, and then they will start haggling from their own positions and probably finally land somewhere between 100 and 200, or it may just not even happen. Interest based is more of employer-employee contract, employer-employee relationship. If there are problems in the team, how can we solve this problem? How can we make the organization more enjoyable going forward? As an example. Position based, it's always win-lose. What is winning for one is something that is a loss for the other side. It's called a zero-sum game. So if it's 100, each one takes either 50-50, 70-30. So I wanted to hit 100, but ultimately I ended up at 70, which means I lose 30. Interest based is it's creating value, win-win. There's nothing called my loss versus your win or my win versus your loss. So in other words, position based is dividing the pie. There's a pie, you divide them. This is more integrative. Let's break away from the concept of a pie, or let's enlarge the pie going forward. Position based are very, very short term focused. Interest based are very long term focused. Position based can damage the existing relationship. Interest based can develop new relationships going forward. So this is an example of backward versus forward looking. Obviously, the most preferred way is to look at situations from a forward looking standpoint and look at underlying interests, but not always you can take that approach, because it always comes with a lot of time to be spent towards towards understanding the other side's values. So sometimes it can be counterproductive as well. But in a larger scheme of things, forward looking is more integrative and more problem solving in nature, while backward looking is more position based, and what do I personally gain from this, not really looking at it from the other side. So at a high level, we saw, so when you look at look at a situation and assess the issue, look at it as, what is it? Is it a conflict or a dispute, and how are you going to look at it? Sometimes it could be that you want to look at it as a forward looking, the other side might want to look at it as backward looking, but the best way to negotiate as a great influencer is to always look at it from a forward looking standpoint and try to align your other party towards your side. And in order for you to do this, the second step is you need to separate people from problem. So so each one has emotions over the problem, and in the process we also develop emotions over the other side's preferences or other side's characteristics. So it's important that you remove the feelings towards people out of this, and just take the facts with you so that it helps you look at the situation in a neutral and an objective way. And it also helps you to attack the problem with an open mind, not on people and taking wrong decisions as a result at the end. So at the end of your assessment of the state, you can develop a situation statement, something like this. So put the conflict at a high level, describe it in your own words, issue description, and then categorize it as conflict versus dispute, forward versus backward, define it in your own words, and then say these are the parties involved, what are their name, designations, roles, and then also write down the differences that you see, that you perceive from your point of view. And then the reasons for these differences. What could be the reasons for these differences? It's your hypothesis, but it's a good way to look at it objectively and remove people and emotions out of the situation. So this is at a high level how you understand the context of the problem or the issue at a time. Once you have done this, we go into the second step of strategies, which is to decide if negotiation needs to be used. Well, there are multiple reasons. Well, look at it simply. Can you just eliminate the constraint which is stopping the differences in opinion? If you can do this, you don't even have to negotiate. Look at how you can remove the constraint. Look at the impact of this issue and the time that is required. Does it, is it meaningful to invest so much of time to get, the impact to resolve? Are the returns of this investment proportionate or not proportionate? Also look at the power or control that both sides have in terms of altering on the decision. Sometimes, right, we tend to negotiate or discuss few things between an employer, like a team manager and a member, where you don't really have control over some of the organizational policies and rules. So probably in such cases, negotiation is not the right way to solve, because there's no control that you have on altering the decision anyways at the end. How much knowledgeable is your side on this issue? If you're not that knowledgeable, try to engage team members who can get knowledgeable, or if not, maybe look for options. And then what is the level of trust between the two sides? It helps to start, whether you start on a 0-0 position or on a positive note or on a negative note. So that's another factor to think for. So weigh in all these factors. There's no specific structure or policies or a flowchart in place, but you need to weigh in all these characters all at the same time in parallel, and then take a call. How would you go ahead? How would you want to go ahead and resolve this problem? If negotiation is a good way to go, let's go forward with it. If not, let's look at alternative techniques and use the most appropriate one. So with that, we complete the strategize phase. We will head towards the preparation phase. So preparation phase, there are 4 things to do. So you first determine what is the right thing to do, not necessarily the thing that is beneficial for you. Then you look at BATNA, which is negotiation as a concept is not complete if we don't discuss what is BATNA. Then how do you plan for a negotiation, and then how do you negotiate in general? Teams, agents, how do you? So thinking on steps like these. So what is the right thing to do? To understand what is the right thing to do, there are a few things. First, you need to understand your needs, issues, and interests. What is your stakeholders? What is your stake? And then try to understand the other side's needs. Critically analyze the motives, which is very, very important. Is it arising because of ego reasons, jealousy, pride, or is it happening because of some basic needs which is missing for the other party? So this will help you address the right problem when you actually go and do the negotiation with the others. Then seek also advice from mentors, seniors, peers, or peer whom you trust to get their viewpoints, so that you are not looking at it, so that if you miss any perspectives, they're kind of addressed. So you determine the right thing to do, and then you work towards developing your BATNA. So BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. So if this negotiation fails, what is your next step? It should not always be that, it should never be that you go into a negotiation and you don't have a next course of action. Then actually means you are completely relying on this negotiation, which can be counter beneficial to you if the other side has more power than what you have. So what will happen? The other side can use their power, and you don't have an alternative plan. So you are kind of at their mercy at the end. And BATNA, if you have an alternative solution, then that kind of gives you power in a negotiation, because you also have an alternative if this fails. How do you develop these BATNA? It's very important. If you don't have a BATNA, you need to actually develop your own BATNA. Before we get into developing your BATNA, a simple example is, well, I want to buy, I want to say, I want to change my house. I want to go for a rent into another house. And if I want to go there, one BATNA, simplest BATNA is, well, I can continue to stay in the same house for the same rent or for a differential rent. Or it could be the other way. My house owner is asking for a higher rent, and I am not happy with the higher rent that is being asked. So in that case, I might find alternatives where I could go if this doesn't work, and that becomes my source of BATNA when I try to negotiate for a new rent. So how do you do this? You brainstorm to develop a list of ideas to take if no agreement is reached. And then once you have brainstormed, you take some of the promising ideas and convert them into practical options. And then you weigh in your options to pick your best alternative based on benefits, time, cost, or other impacts and risks. So once you have identified your BATNA, then you start planning for your negotiation. There are 3 questions for which you need to have an answer before you actually go for negotiation. First question is, what is your overall objective of this negotiation? You should be able to state it in a simple phrases or simple sentences that this is what I want at the end of it. And then also try to understand your related issues and interests in the context of this negotiation, because it helps to explore possibilities and to get towards interest-driven, forward-looking negotiations. It's important to understand your other related issues. Sometimes they can be of help when you negotiate. Third thing is, you should have your BATNA. And when you try to prepare for these questions, do not analyze them in silos. Look at them together and holistically. Decision trees is a quick tool to quickly evaluate your decisions. We will not go into the details of how to use this decision tree because it's a tried and tested technique. But at a high level, you have a decision to be taken, and there are 2 options. Option A has 2 possible outcomes with a specific probability, and each outcome gives you a specific value. Option B, there are no possibilities, but this is going to give you a different value. So each value can be multiplied or weighted by the probability to get the expected final value of each of those options. So your best decision will be the one that has the highest final value or weighted value. So that is a quick way to objectively figure out which is a better decision if you are not able to make a call based on your judgments. Once you have identified or prepared for your negotiation, the next step is to execute negotiation. Well, executing negotiation is more of an art than a science. Well, you look at strategies and prepare and evaluations, they can be structured. Executing, you will have to prepare for it. You have to, it comes through training and practice continuously, again and again, multiple number of times. But then what we will see here is set of things to consider when you are trying to learn and try to become an expert in the process of mastering the art of negotiation. So simple things: focus on problem, not on people. Focus on the underlying interest, not on positions. So for now, you have done all your evaluation. This is where you are likely to uncover newer problems, newer issues as you discuss with the other side. So you will have to continuously focus on the underlying interest, and probably your positions may also change based on some of the underlying interests and issues that you identify from the other side. So when you do this, you start ideating and identifying areas or solutions for mutual gain. So always look at the solution, whether if it's giving gains for both sides, not just for you. Just make sure that the other side is also benefiting at the end of this scenario. Because if they don't benefit, they are likely to not agree with the final solution. Ask more questions, listen and process the information actively. Also be aware of some of the cultural differences in people while you do this. If you can, change your style to fit the other side because it's easier for a long period. So some factors to consider. Now we will look at a set of psychological tools. So there are lots of tools that you can actually deploy when you get into negotiation. These tools can sometimes help you extract more value to overcome the zero-sum game. They can help you learn more about the other side. It can weaken the power of the other side completely. If you can find out what the other side's batna is, you can kind of weaken that batna so that they are at your mercy sometimes to make a final decision. And these tools will also help you to not fall trap if they are being deployed by the other side. If they are deploying, you can kind of understand that now they're trying to use this tool, so let me not fall trap to this tool and be more conscious and oppose it the right way. So there are 7 psychological tools. We will not have time to go through all of these tools in detail today. What is my objective is to kind of expose these tools to you so that you can you can research more, you can learn about these in details in more going forward, and you can start practicing them as well in groups or individually, as however you would want to. So there are 7 tools that I would want to explain today. The first tool is called the mythical fixed pi syndrome. So this is the general assumption that the total value is fixed, and the focus is to maximize your side's gain. So this is the syndrome that will kind of say, it's a zero-sum game at the end of the day. So there is only 100 chocolates in place over there, and my objective is to take 70 or 80 or maximize the number of chocolates that I would want to take. So whatever I take is going to be the loss for the other side. So always try to do not think the value that you are trying to, or the positions that you are taking for the specific value at stake is fixed. Always look for opportunities to expand that value or that pie. Simpler things like rates being fixed. What should be the budget for this specific project? What should be the approach that needs to be taken? Is time the constraint? Is cost the constraint? So don't look at these aspects individually. Look at the broader problem. Like if time is the constraint, let's look at broader objectives of the business units or of the program, and see maybe for this specific activity we might need more time, but for subsequent activities we can kind of say we will reduce time so that overall the program or the number of features get delivered at the same time. So don't look at things in silos. That's one example of a mythical fixed pi syndrome. The second thing is very interesting. It is one tool that is being used very common in personal life. It's called anchoring or anchoring bias. So this is a psychological tendency to rely heavily on the first piece of information offered by a person called the anchor, or on the value called the anchor. A simple example is haggling between an auto driver and an individual. So the question is, the auto driver says it's going to cost 70 or 150 or some number. So the moment one person blurts out a single number, the entire negotiation tend to happen around that single number. Even though we kind of know it's kind of twice the cost or sometimes thrice the cost, we tend to sometimes hit around the same number and negotiate around that number. That's an example of anchoring, because we get fixed to that specific number and we try to always solve around that number. So the question is, how do we break away? Or we'll have to understand that if this was a technique that was deployed, we need to first accept that this has been deployed, and we'll have to look at it completely the other way and break the underlying assumptions. Ask questions like, why do you arrive at this specific number or at this specific value or at this specific solution? Ask questions, try to break the assumptions and then take them back your way. Don't start immediately saying, the other side says, for an example, 150, don't start at 30 or 40. Start analyzing or put it in a different way so that you kind of break the underlying assumptions and then take the final solution to your way. So anchoring is very, very useful if you have a very good understanding of the situation completely. And if you believe the other side doesn't have a good idea of the situation, maybe you can directly use anchoring and make maximum benefit out of it. And in the process, if you make the other side believe that they are also taking value out of it, then it's probably the best solution for yourself. The third one is called framing. Framing is the process of setting up the issue in a way to reach consensus or winning an argument. Basically, the human brain or the human psychology behaves in different ways based on based on how you perceive the situation. A simple example is if the situation is more of a loss-making or a negative situation, people tend to be taking more risks. And if the situation is more beneficial or positive or gains, then people tend to become risk averse. So at a high level, this is how it is. A typical scenario where I had used the reciprocity or used framing is a scenario where there's a specific project and there's a timeline with which I wanted to finish this project, and the team members were very clear that they cannot finish this project. When I asked them questions such as what is your problem, tell me your issues, why we cannot fix this, why we cannot finish this project in the specific timeline, the response were always like, no matter how you try, we cannot solve, we cannot fix, we cannot achieve. So the best solution in this scenario is to change the question and then say, well, tell me why you cannot do this with stipulated time. Then there were 10-15 points. Then we started analyzing how we can solve each of these points, and then we converted them into the steps that needs to be taken to solve or to finish the project in the stipulated time. So that is looking at the big picture. That is framing. The next step is looking at the big picture. So sometimes we tend to lose sight and go in a different direction, going away from the big picture. Now it's important for you to, in such cases, it's important to focus, on the big picture always. Work as a team. If one person is looking at the details, the other people can always look at the big picture and make sure that you're not going away in a tangential direction. Reciprocity principle is, it's like I give you a favor and then you do owe me a favor back. Sometimes it's very useful if you understand other related issues and help on those related issues so that you get your way in this current situation. Contrasting principle is a very famous principle, can be used very often at work. Give multiple options instead of one option, and then set up the options in such a way that your preferred option is probably the best option. So what happens when you look at different options? Contrastingly, the option that you think the best one kind of comes up as the best fit. So it can be used in things like designs, solutions, timelines, planning, wherever. Looking from the other side is a great tool to ensure that whatever be the tool or whatever be the steps that you take, you always look at it from that side to ensure that they are also taking benefits out of the negotiation process, so that they will agree to what you are specifying. So these are the 7 psychological tools. Then we will look at, we'll spend 2 minutes on looking at some of the virtual workplace challenges in terms of using or adopting negotiation. In a virtual workplace gives us few positives, and it also brings up few challenges. Some of the interpersonal skills that can likely exist if you work in a co-located environment are completely gone. People work purely on their tasks. So some of the political reasons, some of the gossips that you get probably are not there. It gives lower costs and higher employee satisfaction because everyone is focused on their productivity. However, it provides challenges like uninhibited behaviors. That could be swearing, name calling, which the other person might not even know what's happening. A simple task conflict can result in a serious interpersonal dispute. Sometimes there could be problems of identity crisis. So you'll have to be very careful about these things. How do you solve? It can be solved in a one-to-one discussion by a head. You build rapport with each one, understand what their needs are, reframe the issues, prioritize, reach the agreement in one-on-one meetings, or it could be a mediation, a common group as well. So each one gives their issue and can solve, or you kind of reframe, explain the impact, and then reach an agreement together as a group. There are multiple personalities which you can encounter. Some personalities might use power to kind of not take your approach. The other thing is disinterested. Use power as, I am the boss, my way is highway, my way is the right way. Disinterested is your other group says, well, believe me, I've done this so many times in the past. and your approach is not going to work. Confronting is kind of criticizing you, like how much do you think you know that you're solving this. So you can face with these kind of situations. When you face these situations, if it was power, you look at bat now. So you have to go back to your bat now to get your own power so that you encounter the situation. For situations like disinterested and confronting, the best way is to actually go into the underlying situations, come up with different solutions, and then ask the other side as to what they prefer. Don't say this is what you have to accept. Just ask them what is their preference, and when they criticize, see what is their line of criticism, and then see if you can change your behavior or your solution so that this criticism can be avoided, so that you finally develop a great solution. And by doing this, you're also building trust with the other side as time proceeds. After this, the last step is evaluating your outcome of negotiation. Three simple questions, that's all. Are you satisfied with the final outcome? Yes or no? If no, why? If yes, how? What did you do to arrive at this final outcome? What were your positives? Did you look at the negotiation from the other side? What tools did you apply? What was it that made you work, so that you kind of ingrain it in your style as you go forward. Then also try to understand where did you conclude finally. Are there mutual gains from both parties' standpoint? Did you did you give much? Did you get much? So what was the what were some of the mistakes that you did? Things like this. At a high level, evaluation is a simple way to reflect back and figure out what went well, what did not go well, and where did you finally end, and is it satisfied for you or not, and how can you improve next time onwards. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying, negotiation is a great asset to have as a tool in your BA toolkit. Well, there are multiple functional activities that a business analyst performs as part of their work. Like start from planning and prioritization, stakeholder engagement, market research, risk mitigation, multiple types of data modeling, documentation, templates, and in each of these activities, right, there are multiple scenarios where you might end up in disagreements with other parties, and negotiation could be a great way to kind of address these differences in opinions and go for a mutual solution which is beneficial for both sides and is probably the best or right thing to do going forward. Following these steps on a continuous basis will help you, build trust with all of your team members, with everyone in your organization, with all the stakeholders, and that lays the right platform for you to become a great leader as you grow up in your organization. So with this, I kind of finish my topic. If you have any questions, please list them. We started at 6:35, so we'll spend the next 7 to 8 minutes trying to answer the questions, and then we'll conclude this meeting. Any questions? So I would also finally, reiterate again that negotiation is not an art. It's not just an art. It's not considered as only an art, or don't consider it as only a science. It's a mix of both art and science. Science in the way of how you can structure your entire thought process around how do you tackle a conflict or a dispute, and the entire concepts we saw. The art comes in how you understand all of this, but how you execute it finally. Based on the situation, how are you able to think on the fly? How you align your thoughts the right way based on the need of the art, there's new possibilities that you encounter during the process of negotiation with the other party. I will continue to stay online for a couple of more minutes and take questions, but I'm going to end the conversation or recording this time.